317A, March 9th, 2026, Nashville, Tennessee. 14 unmarked ATF vehicles cut their headlights on Taylor Street in the Germantown district. Engines off, doors opened in sequence, slow and synchronized. Estimated face value of counterfeit currency inside that building, $74 million. 51 federal agents checked their earpieces. The building in front of them was a commercial print shop, a legal business with a website, a Google listing, and a 5-star rating on Yelp. It had been operating openly for 6 years. Wedding invitations, restaurant menus, promotional flyers for dozens of local clients. It had also been printing United States currency, not replicas, not novelty bills. Currency indistinguishable from Federal Reserve notes, color-shifting ink, microprinting, embedded security threads. The bills had passed through gas stations in Memphis, grocery stores in Atlanta, pawn shops in Columbus without triggering a single counterfeit detector. Across 9 states, the network had pushed an estimated $74 million in fraudulent currency into the economy over less than 18 months. 3 industrial printing presses, Heidelberg units, the kind used by commercial publishing houses and government contractors, had been modified at significant expense to produce output that the Secret Service's Counterfeit division described internally as the most technically sophisticated domestic forgery they'd seen in a decade. The person who built this did not work for a cartel. He had a business degree, a LinkedIn profile, a 22-year career in commercial printing. His name was Raymond Carver Hollins. And the person who ended it was a UPS driver named Marcus Webb. Webb had been running deliveries in the Germantown district for 11 years. He knew every business on his route by volume, by frequency, by package weight. In early November 2025, he started noticing something that didn't add up. A print shop the size of a mid-range photography studio was receiving weekly pallets of specialty paper. Heavy bond stock with a texture Webb recognized from a training course he'd taken years earlier about shipping restricted materials. The same texture as substrate used in high-security document production. He sat on it for 3 weeks before he made the call. The Secret Service's Counterfeit division received Webb's tip on November 19th, 2025. Initial assessment, moderate priority. The agency gets thousands of counterfeit-related reports each year, and most turn out to be misidentified legal paper stock, art supply shipments, or mislabeled industrial goods. A field analyst cross-referenced the shop's business filings, tax records, and listed client accounts. Nothing flagged. Germantown Printing and Design LLC had been registered since 2019, was current on its business license, and had filed taxes in each of the preceding 5 years. Declared revenue modest but consistent. Owner Raymond Carver Hollins had no criminal record. The case might have been filed and forgotten, except for one number. Webb's delivery logs showed the shop had received specialty paper shipments averaging 4 pallets per month in 2024. Between November 2025 and the date of his call, that volume had tripled. 12 pallets in October alone. The building's listed floor space was 3,200 square feet. Standard commercial print operations that size typically consume 1 to 2 pallets of paper stock per month. Even accounting for a major contract or seasonal surge, 12 pallets had no legitimate explanation. The Counterfeit division opened a formal investigation on November 26, 2025. What they found over the next 8 months triggered raids on 23 addresses across 5 states, charges against 11 people under federal counterfeit and forgery statutes, and exposed a distribution network that had compromised not just the currency supply, but the identity records of veterans across the country. I went through the case file, and one detail kept nagging me from the start: the VA fraud component. Because that's the part that doesn't appear in the headline numbers. The part that didn't surface until late in the prosecution. The bills were one thing. The forged military discharge papers were something else entirely. Raymond Carver Hollins had not built just a counterfeiting operation. He had built a document factory. Hollins was 51 at the time of his arrest. 2 decades in commercial printing, regional magazines, event programs, municipal government contracts. He understood substrate, ink chemistry, offset lithography, and digital plate production at a level most print operators never reach. In 2019, he incorporated Germantown Printing and Design using $340,000 in savings and a loan from a Nashville area credit union. For the first 2 years, the business operated exactly as registered, a legitimate commercial printer serving mid-size local clients. Sometime in late 2022, according to federal prosecutors, Hollins began exploring what his equipment could actually do. The answer was almost everything. Modern Heidelberg offset presses, particularly the older Speedmaster series, can be modified to run outside their factory set parameters. The modifications aren't simple. They require technical knowledge, replacement parts sourced through secondary markets, and recalibration of ink density and registration systems. Hollins spent 18 months, according to evidence recovered from his hard drives, researching the precise specifications of Federal Reserve note production. He studied seized counterfeit examples in published court documents. He obtained sample stocks of security paper through a fraudulent import company he had incorporated in Guadalajara under the name Papeles Técnicos de Occidente S.A., DCV. That company had no employees, no physical office, and no history prior to January 2024. Its only function was to receive orders for specialty paper and pass them to legitimate international paper brokers as if they represented a certified security document producer in Mexico. The brokers, operating in good faith, fulfilled the orders. The paper arrived in Nashville via freight consolidators. Marcus Webb delivered it on a schedule that, once mapped by federal analysts, aligned almost perfectly with the production cycles Hollins later admitted to. The first counterfeit bills entered circulation in approximately March 2025. They were good. Not perfect. No forgery is, but functionally indistinguishable from genuine currency in the environments where they were passed. Convenience stores, bar tabs, ATM deposits at banks with older verification hardware. Hollins had tested his output extensively before releasing it. He knew which denominations to focus on. He knew that $100 bills attract more scrutiny than $20 bills, but command a higher return on material cost. He split production accordingly. Bulk $20 output for high volume, low scrutiny circulation. Targeted $100 production for buyers who understood the premium. By November 2025, when Marcus Webb made his call, the operation was running at near industrial capacity. The Secret Service placed an undercover agent inside the shop in January 2026. The cover was simple: a regional events company looking to place a large volume order for promotional materials. Banners, programs, specialty invitations on high-end cardstock. Exactly the kind of client Hollins had cultivated for years as his legitimate facade. The undercover posture required patience. Hollins was cautious. He didn't discuss anything outside legitimate business in initial meetings. Professional, responsive, entirely unremarkable as a vendor. The agent spent 6 weeks simply being a client. While that was happening, the surveillance picture around the shop was being built in parallel. A static observation post was set up in a second-floor unit of a commercial building across Taylor Street, a vacant suite leased through a shell company created by the Secret Service for the operation. Agents rotated through in 4-hour shifts. They cataloged every vehicle at the loading dock, documented delivery schedules, employee arrival and departure times, and the pattern of lighting inside the building at different hours. At 3 a.m., on most nights, one set of lights stayed on, the rear production area. Hollins worked nights. Then, in mid-February 2026, a second contact. A cooperating informant introduced through a mutual business acquaintance raised the subject of specialty product. Hollins didn't respond immediately. He asked the informant to come back in 2 weeks. When they met again, he asked 3 questions, in sequence, without elaboration. How much did they need? How often? And did they understand what disposing of materials through legitimate channels actually meant? The informant answered correctly. Hollins said he'd be in touch. 12 days later, the undercover agent received a sample. 5 $100 bills, sealed in a plain envelope, left at the front desk with no note. Forensic analysis confirmed counterfeit. The color-shifting ink matched the optical characteristics of genuine Federal Reserve ink. The substrate fiber content was 25% linen, 75% cotton, identical to genuine U.S. currency paper spec. The microprinting was legible under 10x magnification. The magnetic ink character recognition stripe produced a valid signal. They were, as one Secret Service document would later put it, the most technically proficient domestic counterfeit notes examined by this division in the current decade. ATF joined the investigation on March 1st, 2026. ATF's involvement surprised some analysts. It's primarily a firearms and explosives agency. Its role in financial crimes is narrow. But federal investigators had developed intelligence suggesting that a portion of the counterfeit proceeds were being used to purchase unregistered firearms through straw buyers in Georgia and Texas. The cash-to-firearm pipeline created additional federal charge exposure and brought the operation into ATF's Joint Task Force jurisdiction. 2 lanes now: Secret Service tracking the currency distribution network, ATF mapping the weapons procurement trail. Here's what doesn't make sense on the surface. Hollins was making significant money from the counterfeit bills alone. The margins on currency forgery, when the technical execution is competent. are substantial. Why add the complexity and risk of firearms? The answer, according to evidence developed later, wasn't personal profit. It was security. Hollins had been approached by distribution partners, the people moving his product into the 9-state network. And those partners had made clear they expected the arrangement to be protected. In their world, protection meant firepower. Hollins, who had no prior criminal connections, was effectively financing a security infrastructure he had never intended to build. The counterfeiting operation had attracted partners who operated by different rules. That detail matters, because it changes how you understand what federal prosecutors were ultimately charging. Hollins wasn't a career criminal who found a sophisticated method. He was a technical expert who had built something he couldn't fully control, and the network around him had expanded in directions he hadn't started and couldn't stop. What's most surprising about this case isn't the quality of the counterfeit currency. It's how ordinary the entry point was. A man with a professional skill set, a legitimate business, and no prior record made a series of incremental decisions that ended with 51 federal agents outside his building at 3 a.m. By April 2026, the investigation had expanded to include the document forgery component, and this is where the case moved into territory that federal prosecutors later described as uniquely disturbing. The forged documents weren't currency. They were identity records, specifically DD-214 forms, military discharge papers, the single document that determines a veteran's eligibility for VA healthcare, disability compensation, education benefits, and home loan guarantees. Hollins' shop had been producing fraudulent DD-214S for at least 8 months. The documents bore names, service branches, discharge dates, and MOS designations, military occupational specialty codes, that corresponded to real service records only in the sense that the information had been lifted from data sources Hollins' network had obtained through unclear means. Some names on the fraudulent forms belonged to real veterans who had no idea their identities were being used. 2 individuals charged in the broader case had used fraudulent DD-214S to file VA disability claims totaling more than $280,000 across 4 states. Federal investigators identified 34 fraudulent DD-214S in the production records recovered from Hollins' facility. How many additional documents had been produced and not recovered was unknown at the time of indictment. This is where the investigation entered its most complicated phase, and where one problem nearly derailed 8 months of work. In late April 2026, a surveillance team monitoring one of Hollins' distribution contacts in Atlanta lost visual coverage for 6 hours due to a technical failure in the mobile surveillance unit. During that window, the contact met with 2 unidentified individuals at a commercial parking structure in Midtown Atlanta. The meeting wasn't captured. When coverage resumed, the contact's behavior had changed. He was making calls on a new prepaid device and had moved from his established residence to a motel on the south side of the city. The team's assessment: the contact may have been tipped off. Whether to continue or accelerate was debated at the supervisory level for 48 hours. A secondary team was deployed to cover the contact's known associates in the Atlanta metro area. 2 additional phones were identified and flagged for monitoring. Agents watching the Nashville shop reported no change in Hollins' routine. Same arrival time, same departure time, same production lighting pattern in the rear of the building. Conclusion: the undercover relationship with Hollins remained intact. The Atlanta contact's behavior change was concerning, but not conclusive. The raid timeline was moved forward by 3 weeks. Originally set for late July, now retargeted for the first week of July to reduce exposure. That decision would prove correct. The raids were set for July 7th, 2026. 23 addresses, 5 states. Simultaneous execution windows timed to a 90-second activation sequence. Coordination between ATF, Secret Service, state law enforcement in Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, and Florida, and federal prosecutors in 3 districts had been in preparation since mid-May. The operational brief ran to over 400 pages. One problem emerged 48 hours before execution. A secondary suspect in the Ohio network, identified as the primary conduit for counterfeit bills into Columbus and Cleveland, hadn't been seen at his registered address in 5 days. His vehicle was gone. His phone had gone dark. The team assessed a 60% probability he had fled. What followed was an 18-hour search operation across 3 states running parallel to final raid preparations. The fugitive, later identified in court documents as Derek Allen Stouse, 38, a former printing industry sales representative from Akron, was located at a budget motel in Knoxville, Tennessee on the evening of July 6th. He hadn't fled the jurisdiction. He had been visiting a family member and had left his regular phone at home. He was placed under physical surveillance and taken into custody at 3:22 a.m. on July 7th, simultaneously with the primary Nashville raid. At 3:17 a.m. Central Time on July 7th, 2026, the Nashville entry team breached the rear loading entrance of Germantown Printing and Design. Raymond Carver Hollins was inside. Operational planning had assumed Hollins would be at his residential address, a house in East Nashville, being hit by a parallel team at 3:19 a.m. He wasn't home. He was at his shop, working. Entry teams found him at one of the modified Heidelberg presses, operating it. He was alone. He didn't resist. He was handcuffed and walked to a federal vehicle without incident. He said nothing. Most people assume federal raids unfold like film. Door breached, chaos, someone running. The Hollins arrest was the opposite. Methodical, quiet, almost anticlimactic. The building was secured in under 4 minutes. Documentation of the scene began immediately. The press was still running when agents entered. Think about what the lead evidence team walked into at that moment. A commercial print shop at 3A. One of the 3 industrial presses actively producing output. What's on it? A partial run of $20 bills. 47 sheets, 16 bills per sheet. 752 counterfeit notes in mid-production, ink still wet. Agents stopped the press. Evidence teams documented the sheet output, the plate negatives loaded in the system, and the ink reservoirs. The basement held the core of the operation, $4. $2 million in finished counterfeit currency, organized by denomination and bundled in heat-sealed plastic. Additional plate negatives, including 2 sets configured for DD-214 reproduction, were stored in a climate-controlled cabinet next to the currency stock. A third Heidelberg press, installed through a concealed freight entrance on the building's north wall, had been configured specifically for document production. The simultaneous raids across the 5-state network produced additional seizures. Marietta, Georgia, $640,000 in counterfeit bills, a residential stash of 14 firearms, and a laptop containing distribution records for the 9-state network. Dallas, Texas, a storage unit holding plate materials and a ledger. Actual paper, handwritten, documenting transactions back to March 2025. Columbus, Ohio, $180,000 in currency and a cache of fraudulent DD-214S, partially completed. Lakeland, Florida, 2 distribution partners taken into custody without incident, and a vehicle containing $95,000 in mixed denominations. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback. The 11-person charge sheet in this case almost certainly understates the network. The distribution records recovered from the Georgia raid document transactions with at least 19 distinct buyers over 14 months. 11 people were charged. The gap between 19 buyers and 11 defendants isn't an oversight. It reflects prosecutorial resource allocation, witness cooperation agreements, and the realistic limits of what a federal case can sustain. Some people in this network are not facing charges. That's not a secret. It's a calculation. Unpopular opinion: the sentence range Hollins is expected to receive. Federal guidelines for counterfeiting and forgery at this scale typically run between 12 and 20 years, underweights the VA fraud component. Passing counterfeit bills is a property crime. Forging military discharge papers and using stolen veterans' identities to extract benefits is a different category of harm. It is an identity crime against people who served. The sentencing structure doesn't fully reflect that distinction, and we think it should. What do you think? Did the federal charging framework do justice to the full scope of what this network did to actual veterans? Or was it tilted too heavily toward the financial fraud? The 11 charged include Hollins as the primary defendant, Derek Allen Stouse in Ohio, 3 distribution partners in Georgia and Texas, a logistics coordinator who managed the fraudulent import company in Guadalajara, and 5 individuals involved in passing currency and filing fraudulent VA claims. 2 of the 11 were identified as active duty military veterans. Not perpetrators, but individuals whose identities had been stolen and whose personal records appeared on fraudulent DD-214S. They were not charged. They were victims. Their inclusion in initial court filings had been a documentation error that took 3 weeks to correct, during which time both individuals were subjected to federal identity verification procedures that disrupted their employment and healthcare access. That detail, 2 veterans caught in the system as suspects before being identified as victims, appears in a footnote in the federal complaint. There's a line in the indictment that reads almost like fiction. Identified victims include 2 currently serving U.S. military personnel whose discharge documentation was reproduced without authorization and used to support fraudulent federal benefits claims in multiple jurisdictions. A footnote. One sentence. One detail that stuck with me. The fraudulent VA claims tied to those 2 stolen identities had been active for over 7 months before the raid. Benefits had been dispersed. Accounts had been established. The administrative process of unwinding the claims, correcting records, notifying the VA, triggering clawback procedures for improperly paid amounts, was ongoing at the time the indictment was filed. It is still ongoing. The Guadalajara Import Company, Paplas Técnicos de Occidente, was dissolved by Mexican authorities on July 14, 2026, following coordination between the U.S. Department of Justice and Mexican federal prosecutors. The paper brokers who had fulfilled orders through that company were cleared of involvement. They had transacted in good faith. The individuals who established and operated the company's logistics network in Mexico have not been charged in the U.S. case. A Mexican federal investigation is listed as ongoing. How the specialty paper moved from international brokers to a Nashville print shop without triggering customs review was addressed only partially in court documents. The paper had been shipped under commercial classifications that don't require enhanced inspection. The freight consolidators use standard industry documentation. The volumes, while anomalous to someone with Webb's 11 years of route knowledge, were not anomalous within the broader national freight data that customs algorithms review. Nobody flagged it until a UPS driver noticed the pallets looked wrong. 11 people charged, 3 industrial presses seized, $4, $2 million in finished currency recovered, 34 confirmed fraudulent military discharge documents identified, a Guadalajara import company dissolved, a 5-state distribution network dismantled. What about what wasn't recovered? The $74 million figure represents the estimated face value of currency produced by the Hollands operation since March 2025. Of that amount, federal investigators have accounted for approximately $4, $2 million in seized finished product. Distribution records suggest between $8 and $12 million in additional finished currency was passed into circulation through the buyer network. That leaves an estimated $57 to $61 million in production unaccounted for, either passed, destroyed, or held by buyers who were not charged. The bills are in circulation. They have been for over a year. Some have been flagged by bank verification systems and pulled. Most have not. The Secret Service does not publish running totals of identified Hollands network notes recovered from circulation. That number, whatever it is, grows each time someone deposits a $20 bill at a branch ATM. The paper supply chain Hollands used, fraudulent import company, legitimate brokers, standard freight, has been disrupted at the Guadalajara node. Paplas Técnicos is dissolved, but the method is documented. The customs classification gaps that allowed specialty paper to move undetected are not, as of the date of indictment, the subject of any pending regulatory revision. No one has announced a change to how high-security substrate paper is classified for import purposes. Will that change? Comment yes or no, because the answer determines whether the next Raymond Hollands has to invent anything at all, or can simply copy what already worked. The network is dismantled. The demand that built it still exists. The technical knowledge that made it possible is in court documents that are publicly accessible. The customs classifications that allowed the supply chain to function have not changed. Hollands is in federal custody. His presses are in an evidence warehouse. His shop is sealed. The 34 fraudulent DD-214S recovered represent the documents that didn't leave the building. How many did leave before July 7th? How many are in use right now, attached to claims that haven't been flagged, identities that haven't been reported? Is not a number that appears in any public filing. If you want to follow this case as the charges move toward trial, subscribe. The sentencing phase and any cooperation agreements from the 11 defendants will shift the picture significantly. There are people in this network who have not been named publicly. That will change. The shop is dark. The presses are quiet. The bills are still out there.